out there that kind of tries to make a better version of GitHub Issues that's built in Ember. And it's not currently, but it could just be served up from S3, right? So it basically talks to GitHub all via its API, and you could just put it on a bucket and say this is where the app lives, and then people would load it up, and it authenticates through GitHub's API. So pretty neat. Okay, so last items and kind of shameless plug time. So if this is like the coolest thing ever, and you're like, all I want to do is build JavaScript front ends, there's a couple cool projects I'm working on that I just like to plug. And I've talked about them before. One is this kiosk project, which we finally have a logo, and we're calling it Really Simple Kiosks, RSK. Basically, it's a JavaScript app that loads up other websites in order to present information on a display like this, and it's powered by a Raspberry Pi. So it's all open source. The hardware is open source. The software is open source. It actually doesn't use any of the frameworks that I've talked about. It's just like raw JavaScript. Maybe uses jQuery. I actually don't remember. So if you're interested, let me know. The Yahara Music Library. So the Yahara Music Library consists of two parts. The backend, which is written in Node and will be an open API, like we'll have the contracts documented so you could create your own backend. And then the front end is going to be all open source. It's not right now, but when it launches with the library, it'll be open source Ember app. So people can go and submit their own stuff and make changes and do what they want. And other libraries can use it, hopefully. So I tried to think like proactively and be on top of this stuff this time. So I actually have like some sheets up here that have places for your emails about these two things, and it has I have some sheets that are the Yahara library announcement press release. So come check them out if you want to be involved or work on some of this stuff. Interested in open source front ends, let me know. Because I always talk to people on stuff and I always forget it, and that way I'll have it written down. That's it. Does anybody have any questions?
Did you run into Breeze.js?
No. So I've heard of Breeze.js. I've never played with it. So.
Same question. Meteor?
So I have played with Meteor a little bit. So Meteor, in my opinion, suffers from like a community problem, right? Like it's cool. Like I played around with it, but they have this. I don't know. They have this weird. Like I think a lot of other people kind of have a more community-oriented approach to how they develop these frameworks, and they'll try to interact with other good existing libraries, versus Meteor kind of just has this non-invented here syndrome. They just build whatever they want to build. Like, so Meteor is kind of like Node.js, but not really. So rather than it being like a thing that sits on top of Node, it's kind of like this, side thing. And so I can't use some of my existing Node libraries. Same thing with their templating thing. It's called like Blaze.js. Is basically took a bunch of stuff from HTML bars, which, it's open source, it's fine, but why not just, use HTML bars, right, when it comes out? Like, I don't know. So Meteor kind of seems to me to have like a little bit of they are open source, but they don't really practice it in my mind. I don't know. I guess that's a little harsh, but yeah.
If you like Angular's data bindings and you don't want all the other stuff of Angular, but you can choose from Angular, but if you don't want any of that, MadJS is really cool. We use it to build some dashboards where we just update data when it changes. It's really neat.
Yeah, Batman, especially if you're using Rails, it's built for that. It just kind of all works out of the gate. So,
I will say that I do like Marionette. I use it in my day job, and I used it to kind of build the new MadRailers website. It kind of Backbone by itself doesn't have a lot to offer in the view area. Marionette really steps it up with that.
One thing that I've seen that's been interesting is people have been combining Backbone with React for the views.
I kind of want to investigate that. I've heard good things.
Yeah, I really like React, so especially all the kind of shadow DOM stuff that they do and how they coalesce your changes are pretty neat. So if we use it actually in Murphy in one spot where if we're just pulling down data from an API and we just want to render it on the page, like React is a good choice. It's fast and it enables you to do things like really easily, and then if you have to interact with it a little bit. But if you need like a full app, there's kind of some parts missing. So.
Someone who just has used JavaScript and jQuery, which of those frameworks do you think is best to learn first for general purpose? And then
Everyone rub your hands and lean in for this.
Yeah.
I'm very interested in
I'm sitting here, I'm like, don't say Ember, don't say Ember, don't say Ember. I really like Ember, right? I mean, like, I think it's awesome. Yeah, you know, that's a really tough question. I'm trying to think. React is one. Like, React is really simple. Like, it's simple to use. There's not a lot going on. The whole JSX thing might throw people for a loop. There's actually another library called Reactive that is really similar to React but uses mustache templating instead of the JSX BS. What a terrible, like, I don't know, those guys need to get together and talk about it, because they're like, if you type one into Google, it'll like try auto-suggest the other, and like they need to get their crap together. So, I don't know, React, I mean, the truth is like, you kind of got to play with these and figure out what meets your needs. I think if you're just getting going, if you're trying to replace existing functionality or existing pages with JavaScript stuff, Ember's probably not the best choice, right? Like, if you're starting Greenfield and you're like, want to make this new crazy WYSIWYG app that's going to do all this stuff, like, Ember's great because it's like, you know, built to be the whole app. But if you're like, well, I just want this one page or one little chunk of my page to be, you know, very, I don't know, you know, fancy. I mean, React's a good one. Angular's a good one. Also, I mean, Backbone. Backbone's kind of like not cool anymore. Like, nobody talks about it. But people still use it a lot, and you know, when you start getting far enough along in Backbone, you see the problems with it, and then that's when you kind of jump ship to one of these other things. So.
There's this post on Stack Overflow. Can't remember exactly what the title was, but it was something like, how do I learn AngularJS if I come from jQuery and JavaScript? That's pretty robust as far as, you know, getting non-directed.
I've seen that exact article, and actually one of the creators of AngularJS is the highest answer on it, and I think there's like 1,000-some plus ones on it. Yeah. It's crazy. It's a really good article. Yeah. It should be on Angular's website, honestly.
Check that out. One of the things that I've like tried to talk to other people, like new people, about Angular is the DOM templating and how it works. Like, that's kind of a confusing thing, right? Like, versus Mustache. I really like Mustache templates because it's very clear, right? It's like data gets dumped into these points, right? Versus, you know, when you have your, you know, ng controller attributes or whatever, and you're, you know, looping over items and stuff like that, it gets a little weird. So, Brad?
So I do have a question, but to address this, I would say the MVC framework with the least amount of magic is probably the best one to start off with. And I would say that Backbone's probably that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I don't particularly like Backbone, but I think it's with the little amount of magic that it's got, it's pretty good.
Can I add one comment on top of that? I feel that you have to write 10 terrible Backbone apps before you figure out like how, if you're not coming from like a JavaScript framework world. If you're kind of getting to it, you're a back-end person or whatever. Like, Backbone is so small, and you can make small little interactions, and like just make a to-do app and then throw it away, and then if you do like another little thing you're interested in, throw that one away. And by like 5 or 6, you'll be thinking, okay, I kind of get this.
So that's the trade-off, right? So like Ember is going to take you 10 times as long to write that first app, but it's not going to be a throwaway app, right? Like, so.
I think you got to write the Backbone app 10 times to appreciate the Ember app.
Yeah, that's probably true.
So my question is, so I'm also an Ember fanboy, but what was your favorite thing to come out of EmberCon?
Well, the HTML bar stuff is pretty crazy. Like, I need to go look more into how that. I kind of understand how it works. Like, it basically, instead of using string templates, it's DOM nodes, right? It actually like understands, you know, the DOM rather than just being like, you know, here's a string of stuff and barf it into the DOM. And the fact that it can actually, like, you know, performance-wise beat like a ton of other frameworks, I think is really cool. Testing in Ember has always kind of been a problem, and there's a bunch of stuff that came out of EmberConf that related to testing and new libraries and people that are working on those. And the third thing is probably Broccoli. So there's a new, so there was Grunt, which is a Node.js build tool or task runner, and then there's Gulp, which is what I use now, which is like, you know, a new, better task runner, right? And then there's this new one that came out of EmberConf, written by somebody who's a big Ember person called Joe List, called Broccoli, that takes a different approach than the other two, and I don't know, seems pretty awesome. So it's kind of actually meant to integrate with Grunt, so like it's not you have to use one or the other. It's you can Broccoli's meant for processing SAS files and CoffeeScript and concatenating and stuff like that. But if you want to serve up a server or something like that, that's all Grunt stuff.
I'm not very familiar with these tools, and I know that they sometimes are criticized as being super heavy because they're designed to make very rich, expressive, heavy UIs. What happens when you go to mobile with these same URLs, or is it really designed to be, if you're the kind of person who writes 2 different apps, mobile app and a heavy app?
No, I mean I think they work well on mobile. I mean, I guess heavy. It depends if you're using heavy in the context of large.
Like a megabyte of JavaScript before you see who.
Yeah. So I think the heaviest of all of them is going to be like a full Ember stack. So Ember plus handlebars plus Ember data, right? Plus like jQuery is going to be whatever 300 and 350 kilobytes of JavaScript. Every time somebody talks about one of those on a site, like somebody else chimes in and says, well, I just went to your site and 4 of the images combined are 800 kilobytes, right? So it's like, that's definitely, I say pure web stuff, like if you're just going to the URLs in a web app or like in your mobile browser, I haven't run into many problems. I think they've spent a lot of time working on performance of all of these frameworks, and so there's a lot of sites that are built on these frameworks that work pretty well. I think Discourse is built on Ember as a good example, is pretty speedy on a mobile website. I think the problem they're still trying to figure out is when you do native apps that wrap these web apps. So stuff like Ionic is doing in town, they're using Angular. Those web views are still not quite there in terms of performance, and so you're seeing problems with performance there. It's not like it doesn't work, but it gives you this, even if there's a slight jitter, right, when you're pulling something across the screen, it just feels wrong. Right, it doesn't feel native, and you're kind of like, ugh, what just happened, But it works. So.
Do you know what, one of the really good new first-class single-page websites like Medium, what they use or one of these? Or?
That's a good question. So Discourse uses Ember. Yeah, a bunch of people use Ember now.
Which ones use Meteor because they take an hour to load.
That was a big thing. Like when somebody announced a big Meteor something in the blog they announced on was built in Meteor and used JavaScript and it didn't load and stopped working and stuff like that. Don't build blogs on on JavaScript.
On mobile with most of these frameworks.
Yeah.
So I seem to recall that Angular's trying to do a rewrite for 2.0 essentially, and their philosophy is mobile first for this 2.0 rewrite if it ever comes out. So it's definitely a problem.
As far as Ember apps, because that's like I said what I can speak to. So Vine uses Ember now, their whole front end is an Ember. NBC News' whole front end is an Ember. All of the Square stuff, like the Square Register and kind of the Square apps you would use as a customer, or sorry, as a merchant, are all in Ember. Zendesk, a bunch of their stuff is in Ember. There's a lot of fairly big websites that do. NBC News, did I say that already?
There's a chance you might be on a CDN and your phone might know about it already.
Yeah.
That's a big thing. If you want good mobile, you have to be really aggressive or mindful of using CDNs and make sure your caching is right. Because if you get that part down, you're in a super ideal situation. Because then the actual data exchange is super light over the mobile.
Yep. Matt, you have something back there?
On the topic of just loading performance, if you're worried about your application itself for size, there's a tool set up called Google Closure Tool that you can use in addition to one of these frameworks. We worked on projects where we use in addition to Backbone, and it has a feature called then code elimination. So if it affects that it's not going to use something in the dependency tree, it will actually remove it from the compiled JavaScript. That results in smaller overall code that you're serving in your production too.
So that is one of the big next steps for Ember is the Ember core team is putting on a command line tool, so you can actually do things like Ember new or Ember build and stuff like that. Versus now it's all kind of these ad hoc node things, and part of that is they're going to actually build out only the parts of the framework that you need. So Ember itself internally is actually very modular, so it uses a bunch of other libraries and stuff like that. So there's a lot of effort being put into making sure that the final build result is only what you need. Any other questions?
A big thing that one of my coworkers is all about is loading libraries and JavaScript asynchronously. So, for example, when you go to Amazon.com and you're looking at an item, it won't load the JavaScript for actually buying that item until you move your cursor towards the buy button, at which point it makes an asynchronous request to do that, which will, greatly speed up your initial load time.
Yep.
The one that I'm familiar with is called Raptor, and I hate it. It's used by eBay, so I'm curious if you have any other frameworks that you're familiar with that do asynchronous loading well.
So I'm going to talk about Ember again. Ember has this capability, so it's not super widely publicized, but when they moved to the latest version of the router, basically it can load sections of the app asynchronously, and it's pretty cool. So if you, for example, have like a model in Ember that is representing something that is not on the screen yet, you can actually have that be loaded when you enter that portion of the app. It's pretty neat. I haven't seen it used a lot though yet.
Segments in the router suggest to me that you need the route to change in order for it to load something.
You can do it other ways too. There's ways to do it other places. You kind of have to hook into some Ember internals.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, it's one of those problems that you really don't have until you have it.
Yeah.
Those milliseconds bother you.
Yep.
But it is an interesting topic because the mobile experience that we're talking about here, if you're worried about the size of your payload, JavaScript coming down, well, this is one of the things that you're not.
And this gets into the JS server hybrid. So the only one I really know of this is there's a backbone solution for this that Airbnb has, where basically it will render your app on the server, send down the HTML so you can start interacting with it and doing things, and then the JavaScript is being loaded in, and then it starts to get fancy. So from the user's perspective, they don't really understand that anything is different, right? Sorry, what? Derby. No, I've not played with Derby either. That's kind of in the...
Yeah, some guy was talking about it.
I think that's in the Meteor line of things, like, kind of a real-time, end-to-end solution.
Yeah.
So. Any questions? All right, cool. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I want to thank you all for coming. The Brewers won today. They're 1-0. Badgers going to the Final Four. I like that too. I want to thank all of our presenters. We are at MadRailers on Twitter, at MadJavascript on Twitter. Please, if Meetup asks you if you'd like to rate this Meetup, please give us feedback. If you liked it, if you didn't like it, what you'd like to see in the future. We always read that stuff and we always act on it. And please get some more food because I'm on a diet. I can't take that much food. So please grab something on your way out. Thank you.
Thank you.